And we're live with our 123rd episode of Absolute AppSec. I'm Ken Johnson at CK Tricky on Twitter, joined by my co-host, Seth Law at Seth Law on Twitter. Seth, say hi.
Hey, everybody. Welcome back to another episode. No guests today, but we got a bunch of stuff to talk about. There's a lot that's happened over the last few weeks. I just want to make sure that we're, staying relevant, I guess, Ken, whatever. We're going to take it back to the basics, I think, a little bit today, talk about some client-side security stuff. There's not a ton of announcements on my list for today. I'm trying to think if we've got any conferences and stuff like that coming up. I feel like everybody's waiting with bated breath on whether or not we're going to do anything in person this year. Hopefully we will, but we'll just have to wait and see. Yeah, I don't know, Ken. Was there anything that you had on your list?
No, I mean, we've definitely gotten some questions about that. We are trying to address that in multiple ways. So in-person training won't be just like the only way that we address that. That's all I'll say for now. And when other events unfold that are positive and good, we'll talk about them then. But in the meantime, just know that we're working on ways to solve that. So, because, it's interesting when you and I started this, we knew that there was some need for secure. We knew there was some need. I don't think we really anticipated how much people are really interested in secure code review. Not trying to pitch to anybody. This is actually just an interesting thing that this is like where we're at in the field is that, it's a necessary thing that people need a good methodology that's like based in practical real world. No surprise there, but the scale is a little surprising, I think. But that's probably just because the industry is growing and there's more and more people around. It's becoming a little bit more mature AppSec. So I don't know. It's probably just going to continue.
Definitely. So. Yeah. And it really has been interesting, right? When we first put the course together and we were teaching at AppSec USA a few years ago now. But it definitely, like, we want to get out some content, obviously if you're interested in it and you want to talk about it, reach out. We do have, slides and other things that we've provided to people free of charge. And I think we're going to redo the website to actually feature some of that. Right. So at least we're starting to share that out to a wider audience. There's a lot of ideas that we have. It's just time and life gets in the way. So.
Yeah, especially as of late. Yeah,
yes, as of late.
Busy for all of us.
Yep.
So, we could probably just get into it. We got lots of things to cover.
Okay. Yeah.
What thing out of our list do you want to go for first is the question.
Maybe we start with the basics, right? We're going to talk client-side security today. So third-party scripts and everything else. I know a big thing along these lines, like everybody always talks about CSP and helping protect clients against, or your website against, other content. But from a basics perspective, like, Ken, you're working embedded. Like, I'm working as a consultant right now. I see a lot of CSP. I see a lot of third-party code being injected into websites, even working on some tools that do something similar, right? But where would you go, right? So if I came to you and I'm a developer and I'm like, dude, I don't know what to do with client-side security stuff. Like, what is it that you recommend, or what's the first thing that pops into your mind to secure a site? Is it CSP? Is it something else?
Yeah, I'm CSP is one of those things that, I would always say that's like a fundamental thing. But I think we've talked about this before, but having a minimum set of requirements for like security headers, CSP, you can consider that a security header. And there's so that there's no content type confusion. There's no sniff. If you want to prevent against clickjacking, you've got your X-frame options headers. You've got like CORS related product security stuff in general. You've got I mean, there's so security headers, those are basic things. Removing like this is the interesting thing. So for the recommendations that we used to provide were such that we would recommend, hey, like, don't show, I don't know, this underlying server technology or the framework or something like that. It gives people more information. And like, I don't know, are you still recommending that, Seth? Because like for me, I feel like you can do enough digging and there's enough like openness these days that it's and honestly, like at this point,
it's security through obscurity for sure, right? Like it's I mean, it is still one that ends up in a lot of reports, I'll be honest. But it's usually more when we lay out something like, or when the server lays out a very, very specific version, right? Like, so it's ASP.NET 4.1. And then the specific build number, as opposed to, it's just, ASP.NET, or if it's just Apache, I'm like, okay, yeah, you can figure that out a lot of ways, that it's Apache or .NET just based on file names and other things like that. So there's still some protections that come into it. That still does end up in reports at times. Granted, even then, most of the time it's like an informational or very, very low severity finding. It's one of those like, maybe you should do a little bit of cleanup, right?
Yeah, I don't have like a hard opinion on it, but I find it, I guess what I always tell people is, like, you mentioned specific versioning, but I always tell people, like, look, when I go to a site after this many years of looking at this many websites, like literally thousands of websites, I can't even process how many websites. Like I can get right up to a website, go to a URL, and I can use Inspector. I don't need to do any tools, and I can look at what your cookie naming convention is. I can request a few files that I know frameworks are going to have by default. And even then, like some frameworks have files in some locations that are like, when I'm talking about like default, like 404 or like some public folder resource, like even the way that's structured can vary widely between framework versions. So
yeah,
you might have a folder located in this directory, but in this version, and then not, it's in like named an entirely different structure in the like more recent versions of a framework or something along those lines. So I don't know, man, like, it's like, yeah, okay, that's great, specific versions, but like, again, if you're experienced, you're just going to browse the site and pretty much know what you're looking at within seconds. So it's not that hard.
Yep.
And honestly, sometimes in the robots.txt, especially if it's like a WordPress site or something like that, it's going to show all that stuff. It's going to all be in like the disallowed list. And you're just going to know, like, there's so many ways to know what a site is made up.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, it is one of those that has definitely slipped down the list as far as, what sort of protection does that actually provide? And granted, we are slipping a little out of like client side back to server side, but it still makes sense because it is in those response headers. I was going to pull up. Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, no. Yeah. No, I mean, I still think it's a client in a way that's still to some people considered a client side control. The other things like that fall under client side control, though, sorry, real quick, are like, where are you storing, what types of things are you storing in the browser cache, for what reasons, like when there's other things like, we've talked about, I feel like some of the stuff we're rehashing, but this is sort of like, for this segment of the podcast, we're kind of going back to like the fundamental aspect for those that are a little earlier on in their career, or just maybe not familiar with this. So, but yeah, going back to it. So like, even, where was I going with this? I'm so exhausted. For those that are watching, like we have a new puppy, so I haven't slept much. It's like having the sleep schedule is much like a newborn, so I'm a little out of it. But anyways, for client side controls, where are we going with that? Shit. This is what happens. This is what happens, Seth. I had like a whole thing set up, and then I'm just like
a whole rant, and he loses it. Jeez.
Yeah. Well, you were gonna pull something up. While you're pulling that up, I'll try to remember what the hell I was talking about.
Right. So Derek did ask, when we know a version, right? Server do we hit up exploit DB to see what vulns are already out there? And definitely we do, right? Like that's one of those things, like components with known vulnerabilities, right? Like we're always looking at jQuery versions. We're always looking at the stuff that's in Retire.js and all the vulns, the known CVEs that are out there. So having that specific version gives us that ability to go look up things in the CVE database or in exploit DB, because it would give us an easy path into discovery or pulling data back. And I have found that in the past, right? Like an XML file that gives a specific version of a .NET framework. I go Google that, realize what the the default username and password, like admin username and password, were for that framework, and it worked. Like the login was open. So it's like there's paths that are out there, and that was within the last month that we've exploited that. So they definitely exist. So make sure and look that up. The other link that I just posted, it's supposedly a project, right? Secure Headers project from OWASP. Really, it's just the cheat sheet. I think that Manico and a couple others put together. That has a list of those things that you're talking about, like the cache control headers, right? And I know we've talked about this for years. The client-side security portion of things honestly, the trainings that we did, 15 years ago at Fishnet, Ken, I remember talking through cache control settings and Pragma, no cache, all of that stuff, and what's actually stored in the browser cache can be super devastating.
People don't really take that into account. And it's always funny in training when you do the about cache or whatever the browser, option is to look at the cache, and you see all this stuff in there and you do a search for like the key thing that's scary that was just cached in someone's browser. And they're like, oh, wait, that's that easy to find? Like, yeah, it's that easy.
Which is interesting, because if you look at so we talk about client-side security, but if you look at the current versions of Chrome, there is no longer an about cache.
Mm-hmm.
They have removed it. Let's see, Chrome cache. Yeah, it no longer exists. And I think it's because there have been scripts, like third-party scripts and malicious scripts that are running locally that would attempt to access about cache and pull data out of it and send it other places. Right? You think about some of those attacks. You think about the B framework. It exposes all of that stored data to possible exfiltration. So the only way to get at that anymore is to jump on the command line and figure out where that SQLite database is located and pull it out of there. Like it's become a lot more like a mobile app to actually access that cache data, as opposed to, hey, there's this easy interface to pull that data back. And I'm not sure when that actually happened, when they pulled that out. I wasn't paying attention too much, but we were teaching a course recently. We're like, oh, we'll do the about cache. And I'm like, it doesn't work in Chrome anymore, right? It works in Firefox, but it doesn't work in Chrome. I'm like, oh, it's impressive.
I remember, I mean, I've definitely used Beef to show like, pilfering through data for sure. Like that's another one I haven't used in a long time. I haven't had a need to really show it, but I loved how with Beef, I loved how it actually made it easy to demonstrate. Like I remember I would do training and I would actually show like taking screenshots of myself while I was talking. So like I was the XSS victim and the attacker in a way. So I'm taking screenshots and then you just like show that to everybody. And it's like, what? Like XSS can lead to screenshots? And it's like, yeah, absolutely. Not a problem. There was some social engineering involved. They have to accept the little thing, but I don't know. It might have been Flash or something at the time. I don't remember. Yeah. So, and I wanted to go back to a few things that we didn't talk about yet, because like you covered a good list, but the things I was going to talk about that I lost track of due to either senility or just like sleep deprivation, who knows? So one is like you talk about no cache, but also like why do we not want refer header information always included? You and I have talked about this before, but like sometimes marketing widgets or whatever widget gets in there, you get to refer off to another site not owned by you, which is another reason to really rein in your CSP and like the third-party JavaScript that you're including, and really like pare that down. And if you can, like Oh yeah, and like we've had questions about this too. Is like, okay, well, but people still want these widgets. So how do I deal with it? Well, one way is just to iframe, like host it on a separate domain site of your web properties, and then just iframe that. So like for instance, you have a contact form from a marketing site. Well, just like put it on its own little separate domain. That's important, right? You don't want same domain type behavior.
Yes.
Iframe it, and then lock down your CSP accordingly. But now you no longer have to actually have this like third party code that's like loading whatever it wants, and you're up to like your security is as good as the worst person's or the worst organizations or whatever you want to call it code that you're including, right? So you have to make that separation there and not just include it. So but if you do actually include this kind of code in their requests made outbound, you have to be aware that if there's if there's an auth token in the URL or some sensitive value, it's going to show up in the refer on the site that that request is being sent to. It's going to be tracked in their logs. They're going to see like all that sensitive data. So you have to be aware of that. That's something that when we talk about client-side controls, I'm going to call that's official. That's a
client-side controls. That'll be the name of the episode. Yeah.
Client-side controls. And then this other one I wanted to mention was like, have you heard about these XS hyphen attacks, like search attacks, for instance?
Yeah.
Yeah. I figured you had. It's kind of like more rhetorical, but whatever. And we've seen this where it's like, and by the way, so the way you would mitigate this is pretty easy. It's usually same site cookie protections. Right. We've like I've even seen people start using again, speaking to client-side controls for cookie naming conventions. Like one thing we recommend internally a lot is to put a _ host hyphen whatever the cookie name is equals whatever the cookie value is, because that _ host hyphen prefix is a native way that browsers know, like, don't let this cookie get set or set from anything other than this specific domain that it's being served from and subdomain that it's being served from. So it's very specific to that site. It's awesome. If you don't have that, these XS search attacks rely on basically using your browser to send requests off to use the site to search for resources, and based off of like, there's a few ways to do it. One of the ones like timing, and then you can like know if something exists or not, and attack somebody that's actually authenticated to an app. So that's like a high level on it. But the important part is to remember, like, these days we have really amazing mechanisms in place. So you don't even have to think about the cognitive load of all that if you just use same site cookies.
Yeah.
So, and then, okay, I think that's the last one because you already covered caching. So, and then just be careful with like local storage and all that inside of a browser. Because, right, like if you put super sensitive things in there,
yeah, you don't know where it is.
There's not as many guarantees, is what we'll say.
Yeah. Yeah, so I dropped up a site there. If you haven't heard of the XS search or the cross-site search stuff before, right? It's almost like a sophisticated cross-site request forgery attack, right? So instead of, where someone has control within that context or within that DOM, because of a third-party script, all of a sudden they're accessing Google, right? And they're looking for resources that are out there, or because you're already logged into Google from within Chrome, right? And Chrome like wants you to be logged into Google and has like, there's all that goes along with it. And so being able to abuse that, it's a pretty interesting attack path. I don't think it's not one that I hear about a lot, to be honest with you. Because we know it's an issue, but we're typically like, let's make sure that no one can do anything malicious. But that really leads us into this, this trust that we have, the supply chain attacks that we want to talk about here in a little bit too, Ken, because it's all the hygiene stuff that goes into building a website. And it's almost at odds from a security perspective, everything that we're trying to do from within the context of the site that we're building, as opposed to what the business and what the developers want to do, the features that they want to pull in, and how quickly they want to build out the site. There's this constant friction that exists that's hard to, it's just hard to get around, right? It's hard to navigate.
Yeah.
I think it's a little easier for me as a consultant because I come in and I'm just like, hey, this is the risk. You guys have to deal with it. If you don't want to, like, it's your site to accept it, right? Or it's your prerogative to accept it, as opposed to you're the one that's living with it right now. So,
and to that point, I mean, I'm looking at my other laptop right there, and I'm like, I have up a markdown file where I'm actually writing up for a more complex project that, you know, I'm one of the primary security people on, like a guiding principles, truthy, guidey, security, client-sidey, document. But the idea is that because we've gotten to a point with, you know, some of these projects are so complex and there's so much to think about, and, you know, you have to figure out who owns which risk and what you can do to put guardrails in place and all these types of things. So I actually had to put together a doc just so that we could lessen that friction, which is to say, like, for this specific project, here's a set of principles based off the past decisions we've made. We can extrapolate out that these are our kind of truths and our reasoning in the way we go about approaching answering these questions. And so, yeah, it's a doc that just goes through like all the past decisions we made, why we made them, extrapolate out some repetitive trends in that decision making and like truths, we'll say, or principles, and then list them all out, and then let that be a decision, a way to make decisions in the future. Because to your point, it is so difficult sometimes. Even for security people, even for me, man, as a blue teamer, sometimes it's hard. It's like sometimes especially with, like, I guess it's maybe specific to, you know, what we do, which is Git, right? Git, the protocols, essentially underpins everything we do. And sometimes there's friction in the sense of just what's inherent risk with the way that we work with these products. What's the inherent risk to, you know, a user? What's the inherent risk to us? You know, where are these inherent risks? Where can we put guardrails in place? Like, and then for anything that we can't put guardrails in place, and for where we can't, like, you know, lessen security, now who needs to have controls over where that decision made? Do we give the user more options to make, and the organizations more options to pare down and lock down, you know, features or to reduce risk? Or do we say GitHub needs to do some of that, or whatever the case is, right? Like, there's a lot to think about that I don't know if everyone appreciates just to build one pretty cool product, right?
Yeah.
And I'm not saying that nobody, you know, I'm just saying it's hard to, if you haven't done this, it's hard to like reason to understand like all of the factors that go into that decision making. But it's a lot, and that friction's always there, as you said. And it's not friction between people; it's friction between goals, right? Yeah. And like the cognitive load of all of that. So, yeah.
It's. I don't know. I mean, we're like, we kind of had this same paradigm shift, right? When we started dealing with mobile applications as well, and mobile space took over. Took over, like launched. Because, you know, most people nowadays are dealing with these apps not necessarily from a browser, right? When you and I started in the field, it was all browser-based apps, right? That's basically it. Yeah, there was, you know, the apps that are running on the device itself, but most people nowadays are using mobile applications, and even the new M1 Max and Apple products basically means that all of those mobile apps are now available, you know, from within the context of the of the desktop, and we've fractured that security out, right? Like, it's no longer a simple view of, I'm looking at things just through Chrome or just through a web browser. I'm looking at things through, okay, there's a mobile application that can store data, but it also has an embedded web browser in a lot of cases that also has specific controls that are related to it. Yes, they're all built off the same technology, but the client-side controls are getting more and more complex, which means that the less that we do on the web server side of things, telling these technologies what they should do and what they should or how they should treat the data that's being presented to them means we're leaving it up to those different platforms to make that decision. So it may be okay for Chrome, right? Because we're saying, oh, the about cache doesn't exist there, to go back to the caching example. But what happens when there is an embedded browser within a mobile application that accesses that site and we didn't give it any caching instructions, and they're storing that cache in an insecure location, and that product takes off and starts to be promoted, right? Like there's different pathways that we have to think about that we didn't have to think about 15 years ago, right? They just exist. It's become, the client side environment has become so much more complex than it was. And like there's no good kind of, I mean, I hate to say it, but there's no good, like we talked last week about the OS top 10, but there's no good top 10 list of client side controls, or, this is what you should do on the client side to make sure things don't get messed up or don't get in the wrong place. Like we've talked about refer policy, we've talked about content security policy, but you are dependent on the technologies that exist and whether or not they implement that. Like, again, right? Like I'm turning into a security, nihilist along with Stefan.
No, I think it's what you're saying is talking about almost like, as you were saying, it almost sounds like a transfer of risk, like more risk shifting off of server side and more risk shifting off to the client, meaning the client technology and the client as in the user, but the user doesn't have, basically like there's more being potentially stored, especially with heavy client side frameworks like a React or something. There's more data typically being stored in the browser that the user may not want. Like it would have been in the backend database, but now it's in the browser, and it's up to the technology that the person is using more and more frequently to do its job properly to secure that user's data. Then so it is almost, I don't know, man. Like I don't know. Maybe you just were always so busy and there's so many things going on, but sometimes I don't take a step back and think enough about that. That's a really good point. It's like a transference of risk.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I don't know, right? Like I almost feel like we're starting to see, right? There was that recent virus or whatever that came out for both M1 Max and Intel Max. I can find a link for it here shortly, but we're seeing an explosion of attacks against that client side because that's where the protections don't exist or they're immature, right? 15, 20 years ago, SQL injection, you saw worms that went through and tried to dump data from sites because SQL injection was everywhere. We don't see that anymore. Now we see the malware community and the putting together basically their own frameworks. That's what they do, is they inject themselves. They've got viruses that run on client machines or on mobile devices that are pulling that data back out from that angle, as opposed to, hey, I'm going to go after the server because it's not protected. So we start talking about sensitive data disclosure, information disclosure, like the data being presented, like all of the data being presented back to a React application, and you're not masking out the social security number. That's an exposure point, right? Whereas, because you can't necessarily trust that the front end is going to mask that out. The whole MVC guidelines of a web application, right? Yeah, you could definitely do that. You could release the social security number to your view and have the view do the masking for you. But your view nowadays is already on the client side, and you've sent that data across the wire. It's been exposed. It may be cached somewhere, like we're saying. Yeah.
And blending into our next topic. Okay, no, actually, it blends into our next topic, because if you think about it, how many times have you seen someone who's including a library, a package, a gem, or whatever we want to call it, into their library, into their list of libraries, and then that has JavaScript that is now interacting on their site and doing something, and that's how they've built their site, right? That's fine. There's some library installed. Maybe it has some extra views and some extra JavaScript, and that's all coming from that library. Now, let's fast forward to the next topic, dependency confusion as an attack. So ideally you take advantage of typo squatting, or you take advantage of a package that's no longer even on the main package manager that people are calling out for, or you take, some other, you get the author's credentials, you attack the author directly. Whatever way that you do it, you override some package that's being included in builds, it's being included in prod, right? And then boom, potentially your JavaScript's running because you've modified that library, it gets included. This is now your end-to-end attack. You are now like pilfering data on, potentially anyways, pilfering data on clients because you've managed to abuse this dependency confusion type attack, which we should absolutely talk about.
Yes.
So, because we're there.
It's the new hipster vulnerability, right?
Nothing is new though. Nothing is new. It's
not.
Dude. Why he's saying that, and we should clarify, is we have a section in our secure code review, and it talks about like, hey, in the past, like for example, one of the things we show in the course is like, hey, with I think it's Golang we specifically point to, where it has places on GitHub.com that it calls, or it calls on GitLab or something like that, right? You can point to a repo and have the library in there. And one thing that we were seeing, and one reason there's now like the ability to actually claim a naming convention on GitHub.com, is that there was a few, I don't remember the exact names, but there was a few libraries where the author changed the name of the org that it was under and the library, and now everyone's going out and pulling out to it. And as long as nobody claims that same org in that repo name, then cool, like it redirects to the new location. However, someone claimed it just as a proof of concept. This was years ago, and was like, look, if all the package managers for Go are calling out to some repo and people like move it and it's not claimed, boom, there's malicious, ability to, anyway. So we've talked about this for several several package managers and several libraries. And so it's nothing new, but it now has a name, dependency confusion.
Confusion.
So,
yeah,
that was the tongue in cheek of that to explain. Anyways, I don't know if you want to talk more about that aspect and how we're seeing it pop up and all that.
I mean, I think we should, right?
Yeah, for sure. And the protections that people have put into place for this.
Yeah, I mean, there's some good reading on third-party web security stuff, and I mean, we've got friends that work at Segment and other places, like when you start talking about, trusting where you're pulling content from. But, I think we've probably beat that horse enough for today. So yeah, let's jump into dependency confusion. Right. So Ken kind of gave a history there of where it first really bubbled to the surface as a huge issue. There was also the left pad issue that we had with NPM, right? That simple library. This was a few years ago. There was a simple library that all it did was it left padded out a number, right? So to a specific amount of characters. Left pad function is pretty easy. The guy that was maintaining it pulled it off of NPM because he was no longer maintaining it or whatever, right? I can't remember the reasoning behind it, but it ended up breaking, hundreds, if not thousands of sites because they were all dependent on this package that no longer existed. So it went out to rebuild the site, and the CI/CD pipeline was like, oh, it failed. I can't necessarily pull this package anymore. I mean, this isn't really dependency confusion, but it's the same sort of like dependency, issues that we run into.
Supply chain attacks.
Category. Yeah. So no one took it over at that point, but it caused these issues, and it caused us to focus on more of those supply chain issues. So that leads us to dependency confusion, what Ken is saying about Golang pulling packages directly from GitHub based on the descriptors that are in their package list, right? And somebody taking over an old name for those packages and then being able to inject malicious code into it. Again, another attack, which brings us to this dependency confusion article that you have here. So I'll let you jump into that.
Yeah, so the author was basically like, hey, I can see that PayPal has some of their apps on open source, publicly available on GitHub. And I assume it was GitHub. I think it was GitHub. Anyways, so long story short, was like, wow, look at these packages. I wonder if they still exist. Packages didn't exist. It was like, wow, I wonder if I can upload packages to where they're calling out from with the same names and have them included without doing something malicious. And then also, letting the companies know. So there was it was clear that by the way, to credit to this author, did a great job of proving on a pretty massive scale that this is possible by actually, quote unquote, simulating an attack, but not actually attacking, and also doing due diligence working with companies. So huge props to Alex Burson, I'm going to say. Hopefully I didn't butcher your name too bad, but yeah, huge props to you for doing that in like such a smart way and really getting people's attentions without like, the negativity or whatever. But what's interesting too, so that was PayPal. With Microsoft, there was a .NET Core. It wasn't exploited, but there was a .NET Core library that was being included that he could have, or she, actually, I'm not sure if Alex is whatever. This person had, sorry, I'm off track now. This person had found that they could take over that package and it would be included in the actual .NET Core build, which was, you want to talk about attacking people at the source. That's the way to do it. That's amazing. Like, again, huge props to you. That was fantastic. So then, there were a couple other companies listed, but again, this goes back to the same types of things. Like the package might not be there anymore, but we're pointing to it on some location where it could be a package registry, like a legitimate, like a Ruby Gems or a NuGet, sort of central main NPM's main repository, whatever, could just not exist anymore. It could be a problem where, like I said, the author gets attacked. It could be some naming convention issue, but the way that people are for the fix, there's a few things that the author talks about. And one of the ones I wanted to point to real quick, Seth, was how Bundler is doing it. So there are ways you can say, look, I'm only going to host all my packages on some vetted, package or some vetted package hosting site.
Package repository. Yeah.
Yeah, man, I am
Artifactory or whatever.
Yeah, Artifactory, whatever it might be. That's one way, but I like what they did. There's two things they did. One was, and this is Bundler. So if you're not familiar with Bundler in the Ruby environment, I know Ruby. In the Ruby environment, there is a bundler. Yeah, it's still a thing. There's a bundler tool, and that's what you use. It's like pip, right, for Python. So this is how or yarn for NPM stuff. This is a way to, manage all of your packages, the installations, and keeping it locked in at a certain version and all that stuff. So what Bundler did was, first of all, they work with, I think it's diligent.io, I want to say, but I'm going to post the link here in a second, to detect malicious packages. And this was actually that package that Alex put out there was detected by Bundler. So that's interesting. I'm putting the link there. So it was detected as a malicious package. But the other thing they do, which I really like, is so inside of the gem file, a gem file being like the analogous to package.json or any number of the I can't even remember anything right now. Any number of the package things that I can't remember, like requirements.txt, whatever it might be. So anyways, where was I going with that? Right. So inside that code block, you would say, and you see the example in the article I posted, it's basically like, here's for this website, do. So it's like, some site, do, and within that little block is where you put all the gems that you want to be pulled from that location, which I think is really nice. And the reason I say it is it's very common to have, like, I need to call out to Ruby Gems for these packages. I need to call out to maybe our internal package management system for our special forks of these libraries. Maybe I need to call out somewhere else for some other libraries. So that's pretty common. And this is a nice way to say, look, for each of these packages, I don't want you to get confused on where you're calling out for, because, we could be, for instance, we could be calling an internal library. That library gets yanked, and now we're looking at Ruby Gems for it, and Ruby Gems actually has the same naming convention package, and we're screwed, because now some random library you didn't intend to include is getting called in. And this is just a nice way to block it out where you're going to get those libraries installed from.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, this goes hand in hand with the client-side controls that we're talking about for third-party scripts on sites as well, right? The kind of that trust issue that you are presenting, right? You've got this trust surface that, hey, I think that this package coming from this site is what it is, or is content that can be run within the context of my application, right? Whether that's within my CI/CD build pipeline, whether that's within the web browser itself. If the control that's implementing or pulling that code down is confused, then it's going to cause problems. That's really what it boils down to. You've got to.
You make it sound so simple with your fancy magic words.
If it's confused, there's going to be problems. I don't know how else to frame that. But again, it's the trust issues that we always talk about, like the exploitation of malicious code or the exploitation of vulnerabilities always seems to go back to trust, right? The user trusts the browser trusts the server, the server trusts the user, and anywhere that we can exploit it in this chain causes something bad to happen, is realistically where I'm going with that. So bundler, just so I understand, right? Like, and this is from this year as well. I mean, this is recent. Like, everybody's dealing with this, all the package repositories, like all the big ones. And I'm sure you guys have been having discussions internally about NPM as well, right? With everyone that's there that works on it.
Since we own NPM or acquired them. Yes.
Acquired them. Yes. But so basically you're saying that there's a way within bundler, in this case, to specify where it should be pulling specific packages.
Yeah. Do you mind if I share my screen to show that a little bit more?
Let's do it. Let's do it. Because I think that would be an interesting, that's an interesting path to go down. Yep.
And I think I'm also going to pull up RailsGoat, believe it or not, on GitHub to show the just real quick what that looks like. Okay. How do I do this? Share my screen. All right. Here we go. This one should be. All right. So if I open up another tab here, can you see me opening up another tab?
Yep.
Okay. I don't mean to do exactly handouts. That's not the one. OWASP RailsGoat. All right. Yeah, there's a lot of. Okay. So if I go into the gem file of this is like traditionally what you might see. So you've got your source for Ruby gems, right? Now, this line right here, you could have multiple sources. And I mean, this is not for you, Zach. I almost called you Zach.
Yeah, just go ahead. I'm Zach now?
Yeah, cool. Yeah. I know. Cool. Right. So, upgrade. Awesome. Yeah. So anyways, you could have multiple sources here, and that's where, maybe Aruba doesn't exist anymore on this one, and on this line 2, and maybe there's a source on line 3 that now it's going to call out for because it's like, hey, I'm confused. Aruba is not in this first source. I'll go look somewhere else. So that's a typical gem file, right? You've got all your gems. Notice you do have the ability to lock to a specific version, and you do have the ability to say whether it's in the development, prod, test, staging, whatever environment, right? That's what the group here block is. So when I say block, this is it's saying here's some direction, here's the end of that direction, and then there's stuff that goes on in between, right? So same principle applies when we look at it over here. So you can say, here is my, sure, I've got a source for Ruby gems, but listen, for my private server, these are the gems I want you to pull from. And you could do, in theory, the same thing. Not in theory, you could do the same thing here. You could say source Ruby gems, and then put your source there. So you have a very specific, there's no confusion as to where it needs to go. So that's one way that people can protect themselves is, again, for this server, this source server, get these gems. It's super simple. It's incredibly simple. So that's one way. But the other way that they talk about that they've actually, not Diligent.io, Defend.io would be the one. So they used this site, and it actually flagged the package that was the proof of concept from Alex to say it's malicious. So anyways, I'm not going to continue. All right. Anyways, some site worked with them. That's awesome. Cool. All right. So hopefully that explains a little bit what I was talking about, or what we were talking.
And I was trying to look up. There was a, dang it, somebody wrote a tool on GitHub, and this came in last week, and I can't remember what it was. Crappy. I'm failing here. But there's a tool that somebody wrote to tell you whether or not your packages were vulnerable to dependency confusion, just based on the packages file.
I've seen that. Have you tried running it or anything? I haven't had a chance.
Oh, it's just called Confused. There it is. Visma project.
Man, keep it
I'll
simple.
post it up there. Yeah, exactly. You got to love all of the application security people that were super just direct. This is what this is, right? Yeah. That's the one I was looking at recently within the last week. So that's all it does is it goes through this, it's a Go program. Yeah. Just basically goes and looks at requirements.txt and says, hey, this looks like it could be something interesting. And he refers back to Alex's article there too.
Yeah.
So,
actually we've seen lots of bounty. Not lots, I should say. I've seen a couple bounty submissions though, too, that reference now. You can pretty much guarantee, man, like this is the cycle. Someone does something like, and the research was really great. So don't let me downplay. I'm not downplaying. The research was great, but it's essentially repackaging something that, we've all known about, but some of us are very familiar with. It's not a new thing, but anyways, great job. I do not want to diminish that, but this is what happens. It gets packaged up, whatever the attack is, it's given a website, it's given a little bit of attention, which is, again, a good thing for us in the security for awareness. And then the next thing I know, there's always like bounty submissions that just follow that. So you basically almost have to keep on top of it just so that you can like get ahead of the bounty submissions that are going to come in from it. It's an interesting sort of side effect that occurs, I guess.
Well, I mean, the other interesting thing on this too is it's the cycle, but they will refer directly back to those Medium articles and other things in the bounty submissions. I've seen that as well.
Yes,
right?
That's what's happening. Yes. You could just do a search in your bounty management console of choice for these people, the author's names or whatever. Yeah. I mean, in this case, Medium. So the author's names in there and it'll pop up. You'll get your results of people referencing it already. To your point. So yeah.
But this, I mean, again, I dig that somebody wrote Confused, right? Like this was super smart. Because this is a product that you could drop directly into your, CI/CD pipeline. And so you would know, oh crap, there's an issue here, right? That we didn't think about the packages. We didn't think about this in this upcoming release and, catch it before it becomes an issue. I don't know how many people will actually go ahead and do that. But I would fully expect Sneak and some of those other commercial vendors to start doing this as well, just as an added value. Come on, dependency bot, right? Right.
Yeah. Yes. Dependabot.
There you go. Sorry, my bad.
Oh, no. There's Dependabot. There's dependency graph. There's all kinds of. There's all Dependa things.
Dependa things. Yeah.
Client-sidey Dependa things.
Yep. And and they'll get there, right? Like that's. Yeah. Anyway. Yeah. So that's dependency confusion. That's why it's an issue. You've got to be careful about where you're importing stuff from. I don't know. I look at this and it just makes me laugh because I remember the days when Linux, update repositories had the same issues, right? Every time that, the Debian repos get hacked or somebody figures out that they can put a package in there. But it's the same pathway of I'm loading content into your servers and I'm doing it through, this trust boundary that we have. It's not a new issue. It's just, it's presented itself again in places that we didn't ever think it was going to be a problem. I don't know if we didn't say that or say that it would never be a problem. I think it's just the more popular any technology becomes, the more eyes that are on it, the vulnerabilities, like there's nothing new under the sun, right? Whatever you want to say there.
Yeah, like I remember Jerry Gambling going hard in the paint on Docker images and the same thing of like injecting, like detecting not just malicious, but malicious was part of it, but also like outdated and insecure images for Docker. So it's like you said, a new technology comes out, same sort of idea, and just manifests in a different way. And there's a bunch of research, and it's awesome, and it's cyclical and repeating and forever ongoing.
Yes.
So it's not nihilism; it's just a awareness that it is it's a reality. It's funny. I was actually just watching this. I was watching. I think it was Lex Friedman talking about Michael Malice and his idea of the white pill, which is, red pill, blue pill. One's like cynicism and one is optimism. And there is a ground in between those two, which is like, no, I totally see the world as it is. And I totally understand the way that it is, but there is still room to improve that. And I think that that's sort of the idea with security is like, if you're not a realist, you're in the wrong field, because you have to be realistic about, and cynical about, everything really. But it doesn't mean you can't be also optimistic about building in solutions for the future that prevent the cycle from repeating. So,
Yep. Well, and this goes back actually to the discussion we had last week with Brian as well. The fact that all of this research for these vulnerabilities and the names that they gave them in the 60s and 70s, right? We give them new names, and we give them, new websites nowadays, but it's all the same issue, right? So what we're talking about here is a modified confused deputy problem, right? That's all that it is. We're running code within the context of, one application, and we don't realize that it shouldn't have the privileges that it does. That's all that we're doing. And they identified this as an issue, in the 60s, right? Which it was, as starting up a program with the wrong authentication or authorization level, or whatever you want to call it, right?
Do you know what's so spooky about this, Seth? Is literally yesterday, Greg Osa, my boss, he was just espousing that we need to start referring to this as a confused deputy problem, because people, engineers, like everybody can remember, because like you said, this concept has been out forever. Like, this is the term that we need to be using, is more like, and I think he had a broader point, which was like that maybe we didn't explore as much yet, but I think the broader point is to use terminology all of this terminology has been around forever. Use what people know to explain things and give awareness, because then it's like, oh, that's, dependency confusion. Okay, cool. Confused deputy. Oh, everybody understands that. Most people understand that in the tech world, so.
Yeah. Well, and okay, again, this goes back to the discussion we had about the OWASP top 10 last week as well, right? Like, and I know we're getting away from client-side security here a little bit, but it's hard to maintain kind of this this body of thought and this like these concepts if we don't maintain the language around them, right? If every time we find a new vulnerability, we brand it as something different, and I think this is what Greg is probably going into there. If we brand it something different, we lose all of that tribal knowledge that we had about confused deputy issues and everything that we did back in the day with, the repositories for Debian and the Linux systems, and, how GitHub handles or Git handles confused deputies, or how, like, whatever, even if we go back to the old mainframe code, how it handled confused deputies when you have like the different rings of trust. There's ways that we've gone about solving these problems. And if we call it something different, we're basically having to reinvent those ways in new technologies rather than referring back to the expertise that we already have. There's not.
To your point, at GitHub, we have been doing a lot more self-service threat models, meaning we have the engineers do the threat modeling. They've even been using both ThreatDragon and Draw.io. Oh my God. But like, I've seen actually more than one now, probably 3, where the developer's using ThreatDragon. But anyways, ThreatDragon has Stride inside of it. And say what you want about Stride. I know everybody's got different, people have opinions. Of course they do. But one thing interesting that I noticed, and like, I didn't really think about it too much until what you just said, but like, what's interesting is when entering a threat, the words themselves make sense to a developer, like tampering. That's obvious. That's obvious to anybody. You're tampering. Repudiation. I can understand that. It's funny, the simplicity in that naming convention, that even just connecting the threat to that word and that concept is very easy. And I watched people with no real formal training in threat modeling do a really great job of threat modeling. So, interesting side note there.
Yeah. Well, and that's it, right? Like, Stride's been around for a long time. Microsoft did that research, years and years ago. But there's a reason that we still use it, because it is self-explanatory when it comes down to dealing with people, right? Like confused deputy, like once somebody understands what that is, it stays within their, it just sticks with them, right? So anyway,
well, we're getting to the end of the show. We've covered, I feel like, a lot. Man, what a day. We have,
exactly.
I feel like this has been a lot covered today.
Yeah, it has. We've gone everywhere from, JavaScript, third-party client-side security, to malware on Macs, to dependency confusion. Yeah. I don't know if there's an easy way to put a bow on everything that we've talked about. Maybe, I don't know. I always go back to this whole concept of, don't trust your users, or don't trust anything outside of the realm that you're currently in when you're trying to program. You just got to be aware those boundaries exist. What is it?
Lee mentioned Microsoft has a threat modeling card game. So that's awesome.
Yeah. Yes, they do.
Says the guy who works for Microsoft and is supposed to be doing threat models. So that's interesting.
It's the elevation of privilege, right? Yeah, threat modeling card game. You could download it.
Awesome.
Here, let me see.
I'm trying to find the link.
Yeah, here.
Oh yeah, you know what? Yeah. Have we talked about this? I think maybe we do. I don't know. Who knows? But this is awesome. Thank you for putting that in there, because we should share this.
Yep. Somebody's actually printed it out, and it's all based on Stride too, right? So it's a good one to have if you're all sitting in the same room, but none of us are anymore. But I think there are even implementations that are mobile apps, if I remember right. Oh, we'll have to dig it up. We'll bring that one back up next week, because I think that would be an interesting one. We should play a threat modeling. Yeah, they were checking them out at RSA years ago. Yeah. Yep.
Yeah.
Cool. So there's not really a bow to put on anything, right? Thanks everybody.
And cynical. Yeah. There you go.
Be optimistic and cynical. Glass half full, glass half empty at the same time. Glass.
There is no glass.
Magic. Yeah. All right. Yeah. I think we'll just see everybody next week, right? If as always, if you've got questions, if you want to join the conversation, join our Slack channel, hit us up on Twitter. We're on the internets at some point, and we'd love to talk, obviously, right? That's why we do this. So any final thoughts, Ken?
No, I just love it. Actually, yes. I appreciate all of the interactions and folks that are tuned into the podcast, especially live. It makes it so much more fun. So, I obviously appreciate everyone that listens, but especially for those folks that are live. I think what we might end up doing is actually putting together some gifts for people that are live and randomly like just, getting people who are participating's information and dishing something out in the future, just as a thank you because it really makes this whole thing easier. So thank you, seriously.
Yeah.
Really, we appreciate it. You don't know how much we appreciate it, but we really do, like, a lot. So thank you.
Yeah. Maybe we'll do a giveaway or a drawing or something next week, right? That'd be cool. It does. And it's not just us wanting to dox you. Yeah.
Oh man, that always comes up.
Yeah, it always does. So
no, I have a box right here of stuff to give away. So anyways.
All right.
Cool.
Well, good deal. Thanks for the conversation
swag.
today, Ken. Yes, swag.
Thank you.
Say swag, 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 swag. There you go.
Swag, swag, swag. Yeah, I've got plenty of swag. So if you actually, for Derek and Lee, if you want swag, send your info to absoluteappsec@gmail.com and I'll send you some swag.
Yep, do it. And
your preferred t-shirt sizes.
Yeah. Sweet. All right. Well, thanks everybody again for joining today, and we'll see everybody online.
All right. Thank you.
Have a good one.